What's up, guys? How we doing? Welcome. This is the Daily Fantasy Show. I haven't made a drop for it yet. I'm still working on things like that. Hope you liked my video a couple days ago. Trying to make things a little more fun, have a little more, I guess, just more pizzazz. Is a good word for it. Looking into this week, we're going to go over some of the notes and things that I have for this week as far as daily lineups and stuff of that nature. But it's a rough week for me, man. I'm struggling a little bit, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to go over last week's lineup. I've made a few notes here, so I'm going to kind of read down through. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll make notes the next day. So come Monday or Tuesday, I'll start looking at my past lineups and thinking about things that I did right, things that I did wrong. And that's one of the best things you can do as a DFS player is look at your past fuck ups or your wins. I try not to dwell too much on wins. It's good. It's awesome feeling to see all that green. But at the same time, I feel like if you do bad, you should really learn from your mistakes, right? Where did I go wrong? How did I overreact? What didn't I do right? What didn't I do, wrong? So So last week, there's a lot of breaking news right at the last minute, right? Shane Vereen was supposed to be the guy, and you also had Theo Riddick, who was going to take over, because Abdullah was going to be out, and those were a few of the biggest news on game day. So to remind you guys what my lineup looked like, it was Marcus Mariota, C.J. Anderson, Shane Vereen, Larry Fitz, Julio Jones. Marvin Jones. Excuse me, not Julio. Tajay Sharp, Jordan Reed, Theo Riddick in the Dolphins defense. It was a pretty solid lineup. I felt okay about it. I didn't like. I thought this was a spot for Mariota, and early on in the year, you've got to call some shots, right? So sometimes what I like to do is the way my lineup construction is, I like to go through the QBs, look for a QB with a great matchup, and I will go down the list, and I won't necessarily pick the cheapest, but I'll go down the list of quarterbacks and see what is the cheapest I'll pay and feel comfortable about with the matchup. For example, sometimes it's a great pick. It's like $6,000. Sometimes it's really high. I won't go below 7 or 8. Because I really want to pay up. A lot of times I try not to pay up. I try to find the $5,000, $6,000 guy. Only reason is because the point difference between the number one QB and usually like the 12th QB is almost within 10 points of each other. And when you're talking about $1,000, it's 3 or 4 points that can make a difference, but honestly, at the end of the day, you are better off paying elsewhere than QB, but you still want value. You want production. So what is the cheapest you'll pay for production? And I thought this was a spot for Mariota. Mariota had a couple good games last year. I thought, this was a good spot for him to bounce back from the shitty week the week before, and I didn't think it was going to be a trend, but look, I was wrong, man. He got 7 points, and it's rough. When you have him and Sharp on your team, you got 2 players, it's, man. So ultimately, some of the lessons I learned, because I forced Shane Vereen and Theo Riddick in because they were super valuable. They had such cheap price tags on them. So ultimately, I was like, I have to have these guys in here. Well, maybe I overreacted. I think my original lineup would have done a lot better had I not overreacted. Originally, I forgot what I had originally, but I didn't think I had Shane Vereen in there. So I should have just swapped Riddick out for Vereen is ultimately what I should have done. But some of my notes that I wrote down here, it says value, lesson learned. Mariota is in a good spot, good matchup, expecting high things. I don't think Mariota is good at all now. We know now that Mariota just sucks balls. I'm never going to play him again. I don't know what happened between last year and this year. He just hasn't been good ever. and I don't know why. Tennessee just sucks, dude. It's unfortunate. The other, let's see, some of the other notes I have. Just because a guy has value doesn't mean you should play all value. Don't go against the grain, i.e., David Johnson and DeMarco Murray, unless you have a reason. I and a few other sharp players were on Cincinnati defense. Should have pulled out C.J. Anderson. I was kind of on the Cincinnati defense. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. This year, Cincinnati's defense is sneaky good. They're not the Vikings. They're not making a splash, but they are consistently doing well and stopping their offenses. I mean, they're probably going to be a top 5 defense by the end of the year, honestly. So that was, and CJ Anderson was playing them. They were bad up to that point against the run, and CJ Anderson only got me 5 points, which is rough. And of course, Emmanuel Sanders, and they threw the ball a lot to Emmanuel Sanders. So I said earlier that my bold call was David Johnson to not play him. Bad choice. Same thing with DeMarco Murray. I think I yanked him out of my lineup earlier. It's just don't. And in my head, I don't know why I got it in my head. I have a system and I have a reason and a rhyme why I do things because they work. And unless there's a other reason, not just because the guy only gets 12 to 15 carries, I probably should play that guy in a great matchup. I think Johnson ended up with 2 touchdowns that last Sunday. Never pay up for tight end for reasons like these. Yeah, Jordan Reed, not at 9.6. He was 6K. He only got me almost 10 points. It was not a good day for that. And that's another reason why I don't pay up at tight end. I just had money left over because my running backs are so cheap. I was like, I'm just going to spend it on a tight end. Was not a good idea. Turning point, yeah. So, at this point, I don't try to rely too heavily on Vegas odds like I do the first couple weeks. The only reason is because now things are starting to even out. Things are starting to be the way they should. You should be able to play matchups and targets and attempts, and you should be able to get a really good idea of who's going to do well in certain weeks. Last week was a little bit high as far as the points you had to score to be in the money. It was around 140 points, and I feel like this week's going to be even higher, and I'll explain why later. And the last note I have here, I don't know why I'm shouting, is Washington has a shutdown corner. Josh Norman has kind of proven himself against ODB. I'm curious this week as far as what he's going to do and see how he's going to play against Terrell Pryor or some of the better wide receivers in Cleveland. So we'll see, man. If you shut down ODB, that's actually saying something. So in daily fantasy, sometimes the matchup is really awesome, but he's going up against that corner like Richard Sherman, Josh Norman. I mean, Revis Island isn't Revis Island anymore. It's like a paradise now, apparently. But Revis Island was another good one. It used to be. There's some good shutdown corners, and it's good to be aware of them because sometimes, every once in a while, I even forget, and I realize almost last minute or until someone tells me, and or sometimes I just was like, oh shit, after he'd already started. So, all right, so that's our week 3 recap of last week. That will just shat the bed. It just was not a pretty week for me, so it's a good learning experience, So those are some of the notes I write down and I actually keep because it keeps my head straight, All right, so next thing we're going to cover is we're going to go over unders, Vegas lines. I know I said I don't follow them so much, but there are certain times where I'll look at them for specific reasons because sometimes if they have a large spread, for example, if it's like 12, 13 point spread, I'll kind of pay attention to that because I'll typically like to play running backs in great matchups with large spreads, or if you're on the line between wide receivers, I feel like if you look at the over under total points scored in the game, and I'm on the fence about both, I'll typically play the guy that's in the higher projected overall, just because Vegas isn't wrong, but they're not right 100% of the time, but they're right more times than they're wrong, right? So um, we're going to go over the low over-unders for the week. We got Seattle and Jets. Jets are 39.5 points in this game. Seattle is favored 2.5 points on the road. The next game is Tennessee Houston. The total points over under is 40.5, and Houston's favored by 5 points at home. That's a pretty good spread, and we'll go over that. Let's see, Denver, Tampa Bay, total of 43 points in this game. Denver's favored on the road by 4 points. Giants, Minnesota. Giants, it's a 43.5 total point game. Minnesota is favored by 3.5. Some of the higher ones on the week, you got Carolina versus Atlanta. A 50-point total game, and Carolina is favored on the road in Atlanta. That's pretty bold. I mean, that's not how I project that going, but okay. New Orleans, San Diego, you got 53.5 points, and San Diego at home is favored by 4 points. That is actually tied for the highest over/under of the year so far. So we're going to say there's going to be a lot of production in that game. Um, Next, you got Kansas City and Pittsburgh, 47-point game. Pittsburgh is favored by 5 points. Indianapolis, Jacksonville, the early London game, 49 points. Indy is favored by 2 points. The larger spreads on the day, Arizona Cardinals are favored by 8 points against the Los Angeles Rams. New England is favored by 7.5 versus Buffalo, which is really good for later on. I'll tell you why, one of my picks. And Kansas City is 47 points, and Pittsburgh is favored by 5. Other than that, most of them are very similar. They're under 5. They're like 4s and 3s, 3.5s, 2s. They're all pretty close games, except for those 3 right there. So that kind of gives you an idea of what Vegas is projecting this week to be like. And it's good to kind of get an idea, and I'm going to show you kind of how I use Vegas and after I'd already made my lineup. Or if I'm on the border between two people, I'll look at Vegas to make my decision because it usually makes it really clear as to who I really should go with. So we're going to look at this week's lineup. Some of the first things that I've noticed, and we're going to get onto the topic, I guess. This is better spot than any. Whenever pricing is really soft, in other words, whenever, let's say, all the good players are playing really good matchups and some of the bad players are playing good matchups, then what tends to happen is there's a lot of scoring going on and high scoring. So typically, like last week, 140 points, you needed to come in the money. We basically need probably the same this week, if not more. And that's my prediction. The reason being, so how I like everyone knows, and we've typically talked about how I do lineups. I like to start at running back because those are your most consistent players. They're going to get you most of your points on a typical week, unless you just hit really big on a wide receiver, like last week. Marvin Jones blew up. So what I like to do is I'll pay up at running back, and all the good running backs, and I mean all the expensive / good running backs are in horrible matchups this week, right? So about the third or fourth worst, let's say the running backs that I choose get between 15 and 20 carries. They're known as the bell cow carry, the bell cow back. So a lot of the running backs that are that way, and there's not many of them left. I mean, last year you had 5 or 6, 7 of them, and you had enough to where you can get by and you pick 2 every week. This year, man, you got like LaShawn McCoy. You're going to have Le'Veon Bell, now that he's back. You're going to have Matt Forte. You've got Shady McCoy. These are the guys that get the bulk of the carries, right? And so another one is DeMarco Murray. DeMarco Murray is another one, and all of them in horrible matchups, and I mean all of them, except for the only one that I like that is in a great matchup is LeGarrette Blount this week. And I feel like if there was any running back that I could put my stake in, It would be him, and the only reason I wince a little bit is because it's Bill Belichick, man. He will come up with some crazy shit. It could be Julian Edelman running 20 times this game. Who the hell knows, you know? But he's got the bulk share of the last three games. He has 20 plus carries in every one of his last three games. And until Tom Brady comes back, I don't see that changing much, especially at home. And here's where the Vegas odds come in. They are the highest, one of the highest. They're actually the second highest favorite to win at 7.5 points at home. So typically, that points to him getting another 20 carries. I mean, if you're up that high in a game and you're winning by that much, you're going to run the ball and you're going to run the ball and you're going to run the ball, which is what they've been doing with LeGarrette Blount. So every sign points to him getting the ball. The other one that I'm looking at right now is Matt Forte. And for those of you who are on the actual chat room, you know my argument here. We've talked about it. Look, Eric Decker is out, okay? And they're playing Seattle this week. And I know Seattle has a great run defense, but they also have a great passing defense. So they've got to go with the ball to somewhere, right? And they have one of the lowest over-unders. And that's another thing I look for running backs. I look for them in low over-unders, or I look for them especially at home. He's in a low over-under at home. So that's two check, in the boxes there. And he gets the bulk share of the carries. I feel like with Eric Decker out, man, Richard Sherman is going to be on Brandon Marshall like white on rice. And so, especially after last week's fiasco, they're going to try to build up the confidence of Larry Fitzgerald by checking down, completing passes, moving the ball, moving the chains, running the ball. I feel like it's going to just be little beats here and there, 1, 2, it's going to be 4 and 5 yard passes. It's going to be like that. I don't see bombs to Brandon Marshall. Brandon Marshall has the red zone potential. He's a big body. He's in there, and he's semi-injured too. And I don't know the extent of that injury because he wasn't on the injury report this week. So I don't know if he actually still kind of hurting. I'm sure he's kind of sore, but he. So I like Matt Forte's spot. If I had to pick a running back that was a bell cow that is going to be in a bad spot, it would be this guy or Lamar Miller. Those are the two that I would pivot off of. I had Lamar Miller in here earlier. And, it's just difficult. And here's the reason why, especially with running backs. And like I was telling you, there's no matchups that are pretty. So I was going through, and you got DeMarco Murray playing Houston. But especially after last week, I feel like if I was the defensive coach for Houston, especially after seeing last week, I would stop DeMarco Murray with everything I got. And that's because that is the only thing they have. I would make Marcus Mariota throw the ball all day, especially after last week. So to me, that was kind of like I wasn't going to go there. Shady McCoy going up against Bill Belichick defense. They know that Sammy Watkins is out and Tyrod Taylor is struggling. Same scenario. They're just to me, why wouldn't you stop him? You're gonna stack the box, you're gonna get in there, and you're gonna make him throw the ball or run the ball. I don't feel like Shady's in a great spot this week. Theo Riddick versus the Bears. The Bears is struggling on defense, man. Their defensive line is just shredded. But the only downside to Riddick is the fact that he's like almost in a complete split. He doesn't get the bulk share of the carries. I mean, he semi does, but the only plus side is that he gets the passing down, the passing catches for the running back. So that's his only upside. I feel like there's a ceiling, especially after everyone being on him last week and him kind of just being mediocre. I'm not a real fan this week. I explained why Blount is a great pick. My only concern is that Gronkowski might be back. I don't think so. Earlier in the week, it looked like he was going to probably start this week, especially after last week, but he was only in a few plays last week. maybe, I mean, if I was Belichick, maybe I'd put him out there for goal, like, for end zone targets, maybe, and that could very well be, and that might bring down LeGarrette Blount's ceiling a little bit. But I feel like Blunt's such a bruiser that if they pass it incomplete one or two times to Gronk, I feel like give it to Blunt, let him punch it in, and it's a TD. So. The other one is Forte, and like I said, and I give you the reason why. And Seattle got burned by Carlos Hyde last week, so I feel like Forte is going to be pretty good. I mean, they've stopped the running game in the first two games, but they got burned by Carlos Hyde, and I don't know if that's just lack of preparation or game script because I didn't actually watch it. I'm just looking at stats and yardages and stuff like that. So those were my, those are my thought processes. The only last one who it's kind of a long shot. It might be a tournament play. It might be a guy who's pretty cheap, who's in a great matchup, who gets about 15 to 16 carries in Cleveland is Isaiah Crowell. He's in a great matchup, man. Washington bleeds rushing, bleeds yards, period, right? So Crowell at 4,400 is a great cheap pivot. I feel like his ceiling is kind of low. I feel like at any point Forte can bust one off, right, or get you two touchdowns with 30 yards. Is Crowell a bruiser? I don't see him as that, and it's Cleveland. I know it's Cleveland, but someone's got to get the ball in Cleveland. But I'm not going to take that risk with my cash games. Tournaments I might take a chance, and I don't think a lot of people are going to be on him, but so those are some of my thoughts. That's why I went with LeGarrette Blount and Matt Forte. And what's kind of funny is every week I'll go through and I'll make a list. Not all every week, but I'll have in mind 4 or 5 running backs that I'm considering. And then slowly, one by one, I'll start figuring out reasons to play them or reasons not to play them. And that's what makes a good DFS player. You have to narrow down the entire pool. And sometimes you get narrow-minded because of it. And here's an example, and I'm going to try to keep track of this week because if it happens, I don't know. But Devontae Adams has an illness right now. He's sick, and that's of Wednesday. So he might be at practice. He might not. He might have a Q next to his name, and I don't know if he doesn't play. It's the Tevin Coleman show, right? Tevin Coleman's still struggling with an injury right now, which is something I have to look at too for his practice this week, or especially today. So between all of that, those are the couple that I'm gonna keep an eye on, and that's why I went with LeGarrette Blount and Matt Forte, and I gave you my reasons why earlier. Moving on, we got Kelvin Benjamin, Deshaun Jackson, Steve Smith, and I'll tell you why I went with Marvin Jones in my flex for me, other than the obvious. So, a couple of the wide receivers that I started my list out with, I got Doug Baldwin at 6,100. Great matchup. Let's see where he's favored. Seattle is favored on the road, but it's a low over under. I'm not a big fan of that. I also feel like Russell Wilson, I don't know what's going on with that guy. Is he hurt? Is he not hurt? I don't understand. He like today he says I'm a full go. We're good to go. But last week you added a knee injury to a I forgot what your other injury was. A foot injury. So you have like 2 injuries in like 3 weeks. I don't know what's going on. Doug Baldwin's a great pick. I had him every time every day I went to my lineup and I kept changing things. Like every week I kept changing things. Or excuse me, every day I kept changing things. And I had him in my lineup almost every time except for the very last time. And that was one of the reasons why. Not to mention, I had a bunch of money left over, and I kind of spent up a little more at more wide receivers that had more of a boom potential, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Kevin White is another great pick this week. Great flex play. If you're trying to look for a cheap wide receiver because you got super expensive running backs, Kevin White's your guy, man. The Jay Cutler being out last week, Kevin White got 14 targets. That's ridiculous. And if he gets even 10 targets this week, he's getting like 8 for 60, and with a touchdown, you're talking money. So I'm excited about him going forward. We're going to see how that goes. I feel like I don't even know who the quarterback is because I don't really care. But I feel like Kevin White is a great pick. And I went with the tight end in Chicago, and we'll cover that in a few minutes. Marvin Jones, like I said, for obvious reasons, the guy is just blowing it up in Detroit. Um, let's see, did I write down his over under? I don't think I did. So he is in a great matchup this week. He has a high volume of targets. He produced like a mofo last week. There's no reason not to play him. And the only reason you might not play him is because he had like some kind of small hammy injury 2 days ago at practice after the game. It was like non contact. I don't know. We'll keep an eye on that. I don't know if that's just one of those, oh, he was just a little sore. He just need a little more rest. I don't know what that was about. Deshaun Jackson, I also have in my lineup. He's going against like the second worst defense as far as fantasy points to wide receivers. He's in a great spot. I got him paired up with Kirk Cousins in my lineup. I think that game is going to be ridiculously high. I think it's a sneaky pick. I think Miami burned the shit out of Cleveland's defense, and I feel like Jarvis Landry is somewhat the same as Deshaun Jackson, and he had a ton of targets. So if you're going to move the ball, that dude is just, I feel like he's just going to get just showered. Steve Smith, this is a kind of a sneaky pick a little bit. A lot of people aren't aware or won't pull the trigger on Steve Smith this week. The guy last year was amazing to me. He was the scrappiest mofo. He literally had 2 broken ribs during a game, was on a bike trying to warm up and get his ass back in the game. The dude is just unstoppable. He wants to be in the game. And last week, if you add up all his targets in the last game, is especially, he is now leading the Baltimore Ravens in targets. And I feel like that's not going to change. He has rapport with Joe Flacco. He plays his heart out, and he plays like he's just a stud. And he's 4,400. If he gets me 6 or 8 points, I'm not bitching because that is cheap for Steve Smith. I mean, put him in your lineup, lock it up, man. It's going to be nuts. Julian Edelman, great matchup. I think he's like the fifth or sixth worst defense. Great matchup. He's obviously the number one there. They're going to scheme him. They're going to run him. If the quarterback goes out, he's going to be the QB. That's a plus. The only thing is I don't like playing wide receivers and defenses. And some of my rules that I abide by in my lineups bite me in the ass, but more times than not, they don't. And so I feel like it's more of a LeGarrette Blount game than it is a Julian Edelman game. So I didn't play him, but he's at 5,800. That's kind of cheap. I see him getting at least 15 points. I mean, you're talking five catches for 100 yards. Really, like, it's not the end of the world. It's not hard. 6 for 70. Whatever. Tomato, tomato. So I ended up going with Kelvin Benjamin because I had Kelvin Benjamin, Deshaun Jackson, and Steve Smith. I explained Deshaun Jackson. I just explained Steve Smith. Kelvin Benjamin, 0 targets last week for 0 yards. I think he might have had 1 target. I'm not sure. Anyway, it was atrocious. And if you read anything about that team, even Cam Newton came out and said, I don't know why we didn't try to get him the ball at all during that game. It obviously didn't work, and he said if it was up to me, that will never happen again. And those are his exact words. Now, if you know anything about fantasy or anything about football, if you pay attention to last year, for example, Jimmy Graham, Seattle, he went over there, he just kept blocking by like week 5, week 6, he was bitching that he wasn't getting any targets, I'm not getting any catches, and there's a saying in the industry kind of that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. He gets the targets, So it's kind of the same thing for not who's the Marvin Jones, Golden Tate. I don't. He says he's going to get more targets this week, and I don't think the targets are the issue. I think he's just not catching the ball. I think he is getting targeted. and he's getting enough targets to where he could be relevant, but he's just not catching the ball. I'm trying to think who the other guy was last year. There was someone else last year that did the same thing. He complained, kind of moaned, and they finally started throwing him the ball. He did awesome that week, you know. So, and Calvin Benjamin's a stud anyway. The dude's a beast. So if he's even getting, I think he's going to get at least 10 targets. You're talking like 8 for 80 with a TD, maybe 2. That's what I'm seeing, in my head. And the guy is priced appropriately. Those are the guys that I feel like are the best. And then you have Marvin Jones for obvious reasons that I told you about earlier why I picked him. Zach Miller, awesome last week. Chicago has no targets, and I'm not using a tight end and a wide receiver, but Kevin White and Zach Miller, I feel like, are the two that are getting the targets, especially after last week. Chicago doesn't have anybody, and the backup quarterbacks like to check the ball down to tight ends and running backs. That's why Jordan Howard's a pretty good pick too. I mean, just on volume alone, a possibility. I feel like the ceiling is higher with Forte and Blunt, in that I feel like they're going to get more volume. It's purely a volume thing. So Zach Miller for obvious reasons, and then Texans versus Tennessee. I told you earlier, if I was the Texans, I would just stop DeMarco Murray, and then they're not going to do shit. So I truly feel like that's a great pick. And if I'm not mistaken, yes, Houston Texans are favored, and they're at home. Two things I like to look for in a defense. So sold me there. I feel like it's a great lineup. I got a lot of money riding on it this week. If I missed anybody, I tried to cover a lot of the bases, and maybe from now on, I'll start trying to come up with a list of players that everyone's kind of on or off, and kind of give a prediction as to what my reasoning is for not playing them or for playing them. So my sit of the week would be DeMarco Murray, man. I really do feel like he's such a bruiser, and he could do great. He does great in horrible matchups, but dude, if I have to stack 12 people in the fucking box to stop his ass, they're doing it. So I don't know. That's my sit of the week. That's how I feel. I feel like McCoy might be in the same boat, but Murray more than anybody, man. I feel like now more than ever he has a target on his back. The other one I didn't talk about was Lamar Miller. Real quick, I feel like Miller is under the radar. He's in a horrible matchup, honestly. Yes, he's playing Tennessee, who's like the third best against the run right now. However, I feel like everyone's not talking about him. I feel like DeMarco Murray has a target on his back. I feel like LaShawn McCoy has a target on his back after scoring 2 touchdowns last week. I feel like Lamar Miller has done enough to be relevant and to do really well, but he hasn't done enough to shine to where the defense is going to scheme completely against him, especially when you got DeAndre, Nuke, Hopkins on the outside. You got to stop him, and then you got Will Fuller. It's just a lot to take in, and then on top of that, you got Lamar Miller running the ball 20 times. It's a good spot. I like Lamar Miller. He was in here originally up until about right before this video, and I took him out because of my Eric Decker being out. I really feel like Forte has that much more potential now. So that being said, those are some of my bold calls, and definitely you need to play Calvin Benjamin and LeGarrette Blount. They're going to blow up. Even Steve Smith, man. Put him in your lineup. Get it done. So hope everyone has a great week. Hope your screens are green, and hope you enjoyed the video. It's your King Commissioner signing off. We'll see you next week.